Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional from Washington, D.C., USA, Mr. Farzin Farzad. Farzin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. Farzin is an organizational justice practitioner. So, Farzin, let me start by asking you, tell me about your own journey in brief and what inspired you to start critical equity consulting?
So like many folks that kind of entered the diversity, equity, and inclusion realm, I think like my journey has been very like non-linear, I would say, just kind of haphazard. Things kind of fell into place. I just, went with certain things, but my original intention was to do a lot more international work to join possibly the U.S. Foreign Service and kind of do that. I was in my 20s. I received a master's degree, two master's degrees, one from American University and one from Ada University in Baku, Azerbaijan. And the goal was to kind of enter, international affairs and do international relations work and things like that. But I kind of fell in to the space while I was doing a little bit more work for my community and then traveled. And in the journey to enter these spaces, I found kind of a home in workplace development, which kind of I was able to transfer a lot of my skills in various forms of diplomacy and conflict resolution and things like that into the workplace. And I found a home in diversity, equity, and inclusion for a while. And as I was doing it, I recognized there were certain areas that I thought could be improved. And my view of mapping, the connectedness of everything from how workplaces are connected to other workplaces to society at large to basically the globe, right? And how these things interplay across the globe. That's what prompted me to kind of go on like a little bit of a different route and start kind of branding myself as an organizational justice practitioner. And seeking out like originally this original goal of doing international work, but in a very local level, right? So the local to the international, if that makes sense. So meaning like how various organizational structures can contribute to the overall goal of global kind of peace, liberation, all these things. So that's a very roundabout way of doing things, but that kind of was my life. I mean, my life went in various different directions and I found myself here.
Well, that's quite an amazing journey. So what are some of the common barriers that organizations face in striving to become more equitable and inclusive?
So there are, I mean, many. For the purposes of my work, I think one of the, and now what's most relevant now is the inability to plan for and mitigate certain organizational shocks and risks that exist, like whether it's within the organization or in a global sense, right? So if something goes on, there isn't a plan to kind of figure out how to deal with that, in a local level with your employees, find some common ground, find some general understanding, and move forward, learn from that, and adapt to the next thing, right? And I think like a lot of the work that I do really focuses on getting people grounded into a few things. One, which would be establishing a common set of core values that are evolving, that new people come in, they bring their values, they can change the value system of the space of the organization. And two, recognizing where values cannot align and giving grace to the difference, right? Understanding, okay, so this is where somebody's coming from, they have a completely different worldview, and that becoming comfortable with it, right? Not like that initial like voice in the back of your head that I need to get something done and I have to like figure this out really quickly to get to that point, um, ends up becoming much more detrimental than just sitting in the space, understanding, listening,
Mm.
and then kind of letting something emerge and like organically, right? So I think like right now that's at the top of mind. I mean, there's multiple things. There's like various systemic shocks that include like obviously financial resources.
Yeah.
My industry, the DEI, has been through some issues lately, past couple of years in the US or the past year or so in the United States, and a lot of folks would say it's under attack. But like, for me then is to figure out ways to kind of continue to make this work relevant and applicable, and goes beyond specifically like certain very myopic things into a broader sense. Like this is how it benefits all of us.
Mm.
So that's one. I mean, I can continue on if there's others,
No,
but
no,
like
but
if you
I'm going to ask you several questions. But tell
okay.
me, Farzin, how do you assess an organization's current level of equity and inclusivity, and how do you support them?
There are multiple traditional ways of doing that. One, we can we have the luxury here in the United States of being able to ask for voluntary self-identification in various forms. So we assess the level of diversity. That's a kind of easy thing.
Mm.
Um, for us, at Critical Equity, we have a number of different types of engagement surveys that we deploy where we ask questions specific to somebody's identity, how they feel comfortable in the workplace, whether there's psychological safety and they feel safety in an environment. And we kind of aggregate this by different factors and then do a 6 month pulse, or a 12 month, uh, um, redoing the survey itself, like a full survey. And then there's a thing we call an equity audit, which basically kind of goes through, at least on paper, some of the more structural things, right?
Mm.
What's in the policy? Is it equitable, inclusive? What's how the organization is structured, right? So for me, a lot of the work that I do, um, kind of, and this is another issue that kind of touches on another issue, is that um, folks kind of have this like organizations now have this deviation between the system that they built and the culture that they want to build,
Mm.
right? So they're happy to go a route where it's culturally collaborative and super inclusive and we value everybody's opinions, but structurally they remain in a very rigid
Mm.
mode, and that is typically, and there's nothing wrong with like pyramidal hierarchies,
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
a lot of organizations are built that way, but how rigid you are to that structure becomes antithetical to the culture that you want to build. So it eventually, the culture kind of reverts back into how the system is designed.
Mm.
So one of the things that I look at is like, can we structure this organization, if organization's willing,
Mm.
can we like redesign the organization to be in a way that it systemically includes equity and collaboration, and it systemically allows folks to participate in the decision making process, how the products are developed and shaped and deployed, getting like the voices of people who are interacting with the clients and getting the needs on the ground
Mm.
and creating a free flow of information to the ultimate decision makers in the organization. So like those types of structural things is
Yeah.
where I think, like for me, where organizational justice lies, that you don't see as much, which in traditional DEI, but you also see that evolving now.
Mm. Well said. And tell me, Farzin, how has the digital transformation uh, impacted workplace inclusivity and democracy?
Um, I think in some ways, I think there is a lot of opportunity for growth there. I know of several types. We still kind of well, our survey methodology can be very like is critical equity is really traditional. We don't use any specific type of like very fancy engagement, things like that. But like, organization, like companies like Culture Amp and, various kind of tech firms are starting up different ways or creating different ways of really engaging employee sentiment repeatedly, right? There's a lot, I know a lot of organizations have this, or a lot of companies have this thing where, they're kind of getting opinions in real time, like through texting and things like that. And so it's constant data feed into this, but that has to go somewhere, right? Like, so you have to have data engineers, and then eventually it has to be visualized and put in a package that's easily digestible to the leadership to be able to kind of account for these and move forward. It is transforming. I think there are also a lot of like exciting things if you're talking about workplace democracy specifically in like DAOs um, and that kind of thing. They are creating sort of a digital consent-based kind of movements where like, it's everybody's kind of like either voting or
Right.
has a kind of share in the conversation. That was exciting, I want to say, like a couple years ago. I haven't seen it move beyond a very niche area. So I haven't kind of seen a lot of it being adopted in major kind of working environments. I think that tech, for me, it seems like a lot of tech has stagnated a little bit in the area of equity inclusion, as kind of like a similar trend as DEI seems to kind of, people are questioning DEI
Yeah.
in general these days. I think the need for the tech products that come with it are starting to kind of sidestep or like not be prioritized in the same manner of these kinds of shifts toward risk management and sort of, if you're in nonprofits right now, there in the United States, there's like massive shocks to the fundraising abilities of a lot of nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits are going under or like significantly cutting costs, and we're hearing about tech layoffs and all these things. And so we're in this like flux, but I'm very interested kind of like what's next, because in this transition period, when a lot of organizations spent a lot of time hiring over the past few years and now recognizing that they may have too much human capital, I'm really interested to see where the money is going to be allocated these days, because
Yeah,
it's not.
money will be scarce. Money will be scarce for some time. But
Mhm.
moving on, Farzin, there is a big role that leaders or leadership plays in successful implementation of diversity and inclusion. And yet, I
Mhm.
have often spoken to many, many leaders and people who are uh, being brought into different roles. And I said, you've got a seat at the table, but is your voice heard? So my
Mm.
question is, how can leaders ensure that diversity and inclusion efforts go beyond tokenism to create real
Mhm.
impact?
That's an excellent question. I'm seeing this a lot these days. I think like, given the amount of information that's out there, I think it's like information overload to the degree that a lot of leaders feel a certain type of paralysis from moving forward. They mean well, they really want to do the work, they really want to do a good job, um, but like, I think the first step
Mm,
is to be open and just completely honest that there are a lot of things you don't know.
mm,
I don't know what I don't know.
mm,
Okay. And so what I'm going to do is kind of create an environment where people can share these things and we can kind of address these things and move forward. In that collective and collaborative space, the fear of making mistakes starts to diminish a little bit, and we distribute the risks across the organization and across multiple people, so that like one person doesn't have the carry the weight of all the risks of doing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work, and then that one person isn't tasked with knowing every single thing about every single identity category in your country and abroad, right?
Mm,
Especially if you're a multinational corporation. And so
mm,
like finding the skills
yeah.
um, and being open to learn about those skills and bringing those skills to your entire organization, I think
Mm,
is so tremendously helpful. Like this current, they call it liberal paralysis, meaning that like, like you want to, you see what's on the media, you want to do good, you don't want to be seen as anything ist, right? To the degree that like you don't know what to do, and so you retreat, and then you do this thing where you kind of place the burden on those who report to you.
mm,
You're looking for happy guy in the sky with some very like, strategic generals on the ground, and you can't operate an organization, that's
well said.
militaristic. You can't really
Yeah.
do that here in this
No, no,
type of organization.
absolutely right. But then tell me, given all the work that you do with so many different organizations, do you see any universal principles of equity and inclusion that may evolve across the world other than the SDGs, of course, or do they vary significantly by culture and country?
Um, that's a more normative kind of thing than like experiential. Like
Mhm.
in my experience, given the various contexts, and especially somebody who's doing this work in the US, like if I go do this for an international team, there's
Mhm.
already a stigma that, oh, this person's going to bring Americanism into our space, and
Yeah.
that's not for us, right? And so it's very difficult to do that.
Mhm.
So I do think given enough time and given enough work, um, and for me to go into a space and give them the grace and agency to recognize that they have the innate ability to view when something is harmful,
Mhm.
and not have me tell them from a very unique American perspective, which I grew up in. Um, I think folks eventually come to the conclusion that all voices are valuable and
Right.
human beings are valuable in a space and need to be heard, and it's like generally having some form of democratic participation, whether it's consultative to a leadership or
Mhm.
whether it's completely flat, where everybody has equal share and equal vote in a space. You can apply the system or structure to your specific organization with but you eventually come to very similar human foundational
Mhm.
principles, right?
Mhm.
um and that takes, and for me the challenge doing this work a lot is giving grace to that and recognizing that there can be a certain, if you do this work enough, there can be a certain type of hubris or like inflatedness in yourself that, oh, I know what's the best thing to do, when in reality I am not in a position to teach morality. I'm in a position to go into a space and operationally figure out what's the best working mechanisms, what skills do people need to collaborate and be able to kind of come to conclusions where voices are heard, not just because that's a good thing, but because we need that to create better products,
Mhm.
right? If you know somebody from a certain region of your country
Mhm.
that like that you bring that person on and you silence them,
Mhm.
and you're like, well, this product isn't going to work well in my region because of XYZ factor,
Mhm.
then that's going to affect your bottom line as well, right? So we
Mhm.
need, and then so giving, to your point, giving grace to that without, I'm going to bring this, without this mentality of, oh yeah, I'm bringing this person because they're going to increase my revenues in X
Mhm.
region,
Mhm.
right? Like that is a very transactional, that is a very exploitative mindset.
Yeah.
But the idea of opening it up to like one, human value, and two, better serving your clients without going into a space where like if I make my company diverse but obedient, I'm
Mhm.
going to increase my revenues XYZ percent, like um and
Yeah.
so that's the issue itself. But
Yes.
bringing people on and giving them grace and autonomy and agency to do the work that they're doing, um with the skills that they have, the knowledge of their own communities, I think is a great way to like avoid the type of tokenism and putting people in positions to constantly bug them about, oh, what does your people think about this, and what
Mm.
is your, that kind of thing. And so
Yeah,
this comes with just more open, like, to your point,
well said.
democratic kind of working
Yeah.
arrangements.
So I have time for two more questions. My next
Please.
question is, in what ways do you think, Farzin, remote and hybrid work models will shape the future of equitable workplaces?
Um, Remote and hybrid, both. So I think we saw quite a bit of interesting things coming out of um the pandemic
Mm,
period, and still today. One, there was this like sort of anecdotal, but like some minor research showing that folks who generally felt unsafe in their workplaces and felt unheard
mm,
um, really liked the remote environment,
yeah,
because you feel safe at home generally, right? And your work is essentially mediated through this screen,
yeah.
and the disconnection between it. So so for them, like, it felt like um generally like kind of safe. But like we're seeing, I think there's also that disconnection comes with an opposite
Mm,
end, where that it's much harder to build trust and build collaborative environments, and truly build like inclusive environments without our natural innate instinct to thrive in a social space,
mm,
right?
mm.
So like but there's ways of doing it. I mean, like, it's not impossible. Like, it's just
Yeah.
there's a different kind of route um to do it. So in many ways, it, like, it has improved some form of feelings of psychological safety that have it contributed to the mental health for some. For others, who really thrive in, especially those are more extroverted and thrive in like really collaborative spaces where you can just tap somebody and be like, hey, can you
Mm,
check this out? Whatever. It's been much more difficult. And so um, I think, like, finding that accommodation for both types um, is going to be interesting. I do, like, most of my work is remote, and I work full time in a remote organization at this point,
mm,
in
mm.
conjunction with my
Yeah,
consultancy.
yeah.
And I find that, like, there needs to be some extra kind of work, and there's some reminders, like, like, simulate an in-person space
Mm,
to the degree that you are able to, and it makes sense. And that means, accounting for any sort of neurodivergences, and accounting for like the type of exhaustion that you feel from being on a screen and that kind of thing. But, some things that you say, try to keep cameras on if you can. People can see your facial expressions. They can see the passion that you have, um, in a space, like, really, just be like, try and be yourself. And I think that resonates for a lot of people,
yeah.
but also there is a piece missing from it. So the future of work, I think, is the is so hybrid, and or especially remote environments are globalizing faster than we can
Yeah.
um possibly even study, like.
Mm,
but um
mm.
but there are trade-offs and things to kind of very much prepare for as you go into into this brave new world environment,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Well said. Farzin, I could just keep talking to you for hours. You have so much knowledge on the
likewise, I
subject,
love these questions.
but we've run out of time. So I just want to say thank you, Farzin, for speaking to me at such length about diversity, equity, inclusion. Clearly, you know this topic so well. You articulated some amazing thoughts on different aspects of DEI. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
I appreciate it. It's been an honor. Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called you.